Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to do another deep dive. And this time, I thought we could tackle something a little different.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at the idea of burnout, but through the lens of the tarot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, the magician specifically. When you think about the magician, right, it's all about power, about control, really manifesting your will in the world.
Right, yeah.
But then I started thinking, could that same drive to achieve, to succeed, could that actually be what leads to burnout? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question because you're right. We often picture the magician as this archetype of ultimate success. Like they have it all figured out. But like all archetypes, there's always that shadow side,
Oh, yeah.
And it's in that shadow side, I think, where we start to find the connection with burnout.
So is it almost like too much of a good thing? Like the magician's ambition and drive can actually backfire.
Exactly. Because the magician, they embody traits like perfectionism, this constant striving for excellence.
Right.
And those can be great things in moderation. But if you take them to the extreme, it can become a trap.
Yeah, I see that.
And so I always think of that classic image of the juggler. You start with a few balls, then you add more and more. At some point, it's not even about mastery anymore, right? It's just this pressure to keep everything up in the air.
Wow, yeah.
And that's unsustainable. Eventually, something's going to drop.
And that's where burnout comes in. That's something I've always struggled with personally. How do I know if I'm just tired versus actually burned out? What do you think? How do we tell the difference?
Well, I think that with simple tiredness, rest is usually the cure. You get some sleep, you take a break, you feel better. But burnout, it's a different beast. It goes much deeper. It's this exhaustion, this emotional, mental exhaustion that's often caused by just chronic, unrelenting stress.
Right, it just builds and builds.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually this interesting study. It's called Burnout Syndrome, a modern-day plague. And it actually describes burnout as a psychological state, like a shadow side of that magician energy. So when that desire for control, for doing everything perfectly, when that becomes too much, too extreme, it can create the perfect conditions for burnout.
Wow. So the very qualities that we think of as successful, those can be the seeds of burnout if we're not careful.
Exactly.
So far, we've been talking a lot about the downsides of the magician's ambition, right? But the magician also represents resourcefulness, strategy. I mean, they are thinking ahead. Couldn't we also use those qualities to prevent burnout in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really crucial point because the magician doesn't just represent striving for the sake of striving. They represent intentional action, right? Which is a huge lesson for us. So instead of just getting swept up in this frenzy of trying to do it all, think about how the magician carefully chooses what to focus on.
That's interesting.
So if you look at your own goals right now, your projects, is there anything that you could maybe delegate or postpone to make space for what truly matters?
Like learning to say no to things to protect your energy.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it ties into another aspect of the magician, which is acceptance.
Oh yeah, they always seem so self-assured.
Right. The magician understands they can't control everything.
Right.
And that's powerful. Embracing imperfection, learning from mistakes, instead of being paralyzed by that fear of failure.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Because that's huge for building resilience. And resilience protects us from burnout.
So it's almost like saying yes to the process, to learning and growing from mistakes.
Yes, exactly. Think about it this way. What if every day you spent just 10 minutes reflecting on one mistake you made and what you learned from it?
Well, that's a good idea.
Instead of beating yourself up, right?
Right.
That's a total magician move. Turning potential setbacks into fuel for growth.
I love that. So it sounds like the takeaway here is that while the magician's ambition, that drive for achievement, can definitely be a path towards burnout, the archetype also gives us the tools we need to find balance.
Yeah.
It's almost like having personal power is a responsibility, not just a prize to be grasped.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And that brings us to something I'd like you to consider as we wrap up here. If the magician could give you one piece of advice to prevent burnout, what would it be? What do you think this archetype can teach us about using our talents, our energy wisely?
Really something to think about. Thanks for joining me today with such a fascinating deep dive.
Of course. It was a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, until next time, take care.
Take care.